So Baki Hanma Season 2 has finally wrapped up, and I was really upset for the longest time that it took forever for this season to come out after the last one. It took over an entire year, but considering the fact we got twice as many episodes as we got for the last season, even though it was split into two parts, I think it was very well worth it. And of course, because it builds up to the long-awaited fight between YUJIRO Hanma and Baki himself. Now, if you guys have only watched the Netflix Baki, there's actually 2 seasons of Baki that existed back in the 90s, which I remember watching, and is still one of my favorite iterations of Baki. It adapts the first manga series, just Baki the Grappler, and this is where a lot of the backstory and the original fight between Baki and Yujiro happens, so it's really interesting to me about how important those seasons are, or how important that original fight is and the death of Baki's mom, and yet you don't see that in the Netflix version. So if you've only watched the Netflix one, I would highly recommend going back and watching the first 2 seasons of Baki the Grappler from the 90s, because it's going to kind of give you a little bit more of the storyline and where Baki originated from in his first initial training to defeat Yujiro, and all the stuff that is kind of important for this season. And though I think the Netflix anime does a very good job kind of explaining it and showing you flashback sequences and getting into Baki's head and how he feels about the situation, I do obviously think all of the added context of watching the originals will definitely help you enjoy this. But let's talk about what we did get here. Now, the first thing is how surreal it is to me to actually see Baki versus Yujiro animated, because, number one, I watched the 90s one, for the first time way back, many, many years ago, so it's so strange to finally see the rematch. Number two is I never read this far into the manga, so this is actually my first time seeing them fight, and the fact that this fight has been built up for so long. So I guess the question is, does it live up to the hype? Well, I think we have to talk about a couple of things first. The first thing is, I know that the Netflix anime is limited by its budget, and I know that the Baki fighting and the way that the fighting is expressed and explained might work better in the manga, because there is a lot of narration and there's a lot of explanation. So this is why the fight between Baki and Yujiro takes like 7 episodes to complete, and I really, really wanted to wait to watch them all at once, because in the manga you can have a lot of narration and a lot of explanation of to how the techniques are working, what parts of the body are being affected, and the intricacies of the fighting themselves. And I've always said that even though Baki is very exaggerated, it's a very ridiculous, off-the-wall, over-the-top series, like by far it is probably the most ridiculous anime that I watch. However, I do think that Baki always takes traditional fighting techniques, ideas, and styles, and that the author is very, very knowledgeable of different fighting styles and techniques and how they work, and explaining them in very intricate details. It's just the fact that the characters are so ridiculously strong that everything is hyper exaggerated. But I think the philosophies and the ideas of what he's talking about behind the fights themselves come from real life fighting ideas. They're just kind of on a scale that we can't possibly comprehend. Like when he talks about Baki being liquid and putting himself into a comparison with a cockroach and how fast it can move, and relieving the tension from your body, making yourself feel like water, making yourself able to flow. These are ideas that have been talked about in martial arts for decades upon decades. These are things that Bruce Lee talked about back in the day and brought over to the West. All of these concepts have been around for a very long time. It's just that Baki exaggerates them to the highest degree. And so when you're pitting these two characters against each other, this father and son dynamic, which that has its own theme and idea that's running through the entire manga as well, on top of being able to explain what these characters are doing physically with their bodies, or how Yujiro can get hit and then sort of distribute the pain throughout his entire body instead of taking it in one spot so he doesn't feel the pain as strongly. Or when Baki gets into his classic Triceratops pose, which I tried to imitate here to the best of my ability. You guys can tell me how I did. The anime takes its time, and because the fight is drawn out through so many episodes, you might think that the physicality of the fight itself only happens a little bit at a time, but there's so much happening behind the scenes, not only with the explanations, but also between the characters. And I think that having the fight take as long as it did was important, because it was built up for so long. So if it only took place over the course of one episode, that would be very disappointing. But also because you have this strange father-son dynamic that is at play that is so toxic and so messed up and so deeply rooted in trauma that it's not even funny. Yujiro, of course, killed Baki's mother, but also Baki has spent all of this time trying to build himself up to a strength level to compete against his father. But they have completely different ideals. Whereas Yujiro is the strongest man in the world and can basically do whatever he wants, and he intimidates presidents, and he can take out giant elephants, and he does all of these wild things. Baki, on the other hand, has only been trying to improve himself for the longest time simply to defeat his father. Baki doesn't care about being the strongest. However, Yujiro is the strongest. So in order to beat Yujiro, he has to be. And he's gone through all of these trials and tribulations, through the tournaments, through going to prison and fighting Oliva, and everything that he's done, the shadow boxing, the shadow training. It's time for him to finally do it, but he doesn't want the battle to be just like all of the others. In a way, he is looking for approval from his father in the kind of like messed up way that you can imagine from the Baki universe. He doesn't want the fight to be something decided beforehand. He wants it to happen naturally. He wants to actually be able to sit down and have dinner with his father. He wants to have a conversation with him. He wants to have the fight break out at a time where it flows naturally from their conversation, from a dispute, rather than, hey, I'm going to meet you here at this place and this time for a fight. And I think that that's really interesting. And Baki himself, as much as he seems to resent his father, at the same time, he has this admiration for him because of who he is. And also this sort of mystery of Yujiro's strength and the Hanma bloodline, and what does it all mean? And, can you be accepted? Can you have some kind of relationship here? Is there something that can come out of these two fighting other than just pain and despair? And I think all of the variations of this fight really delivered on everything it needed to do. I think that it showed that Baki was at a level to where he could be respected by Yujiro, but it also didn't short-sight Yujiro because it took a very, very long time for Baki to do anything that actually affected or caused any damage to Yujiro. In fact, in the beginning, Yujiro was just scolding him. He's punishing him. He was giving him a spanking. You know what I mean? He was doing all of these things that were just kind of like a father disciplining his child. And then Baki had to kind of slowly rise up. Baki would attempt to do something, he would try it again, and because he used the technique once already, Yujiro would just kind of throw him down. And then I love how, as the fight is expanding, it's becoming this sort of thing that is bringing everybody together. Everybody is enthralled by it. Not just the crowd in the city where they're fighting, but you see the other characters. You see Hanayama, you see Pickle from the top of the building looking down. And I love that tension between Pickle and Yujiro because we never got to see them fight, but then Baki interrupts and just says, no, like, this is my fight. So that was fantastic. You got to see everybody taking precautions and everybody worried about like what devastation this fight is actually going to cause. So I thought the build up for it was great, and I thought the way that it expanded and slowly expanded from episode to episode, with more of the crowd gathering, with more intensity within the fight, and then also more of a bond forming between these two characters as it went on. Now, I've heard in the manga, I haven't read past this point, but I've heard in the manga that Yujiro does sort of like, in a way, like mellow out over time. So I think this is sort of like the precursor of Yujiro kind of accepting Baki, number one, and by accepting him, by accepting the fact that there is somebody else on his level, or even at the end of the fight, which, spoiler, I mean, if you guys haven't seen the anime already, like, I apologize, but it's kind of important to talk about. So the way that the anime describes it at the end of the fight, Yujiro does win, but he also does declare Baki the strongest, because in Yujiro's worldview, if you were able to make somebody else succumb to your will and make them do what you want to, you have that control and you have that strength. He demonstrates this several times by his own physical strength, but Baki actually makes him kind of fold to his will in the sort of imaginary, dinner situation, Baki flipping the table and Yujiro defending against it. It was Yujiro going into Baki's frame in that particular instance, which made Yujiro declare Baki as the strongest, because no one else has ever made Yujiro do that. So I thought that was a really interesting dynamic, that even though Yujiro won the fight, Yujiro legitimately hands over the title of strongest to Baki, because he was able to be molded into Baki's frame, which is what nobody has ever been able to do. And in Yujiro's worldview, like, even if that's not true, even if Yujiro is physically stronger than Baki, in Yujiro's worldview, if you were able to make somebody else, force somebody else to do something against their will because of your presence or your strength or your domineering willpower, that makes you stronger than them. So I thought that was a really interesting dynamic to put there. And I think it makes sense because, you can't really have this fight go either way and have it be satisfying, because of how much Yujiro has been built up over time. It would be a little bit strange to see Baki beat him, but at the same time, if you just had Baki win, it would feel a little bit too much like a cliche. Baki trains for a long time and then beats the powerful enemy. I kind of like how it was a little bit ambiguous. It was a little bit so Yujiro wins, but also Baki gets that legitimate title. There were other things happening in this season too, like Retsu becoming a boxer. Now, you could say that took away from the Yujiro versus Baki stuff because that was kind of in the first 3 or 4 episodes of the second half of the season, but Retsu has always been one of my favorite Baki characters. I'd say like Yujiro, Baki, Retsu, and Hanayama, those are my favorite characters. So I like being able to see him do that. I liked him incorporating the kung fu within the boxing and, being able to fight with a peg leg. I mean, that says something. But like the Baki story usually does, sometimes it focuses on other characters for a very long time. So there's some we didn't get to see. We didn't get to see a lot of Jack Hanma here. We didn't even really get to see a lot of Pickle, and Pickle was the prime focus of the first half of the season. So he really only showed up as an observer to the Yujiro versus Baki fight. But it's good to know that he's still around, caveman just kind of lurking in the shadows at any time. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I love the Baki series, man. Like, nothing else in the world makes me want to work out as much as this series. Nothing makes me want to, like, go hit the punching bag for hours as much as this series. Like, I just want to train my body, eat as much protein and meat as possible, go to the gym, and just try to get as jacked as I possibly can. So maybe someday I can look like 30% of what a Baki character looks like. And some people say it's gross and over-exaggerated, but that's what I want. I want to be gross, all right? I don't care. If you guys have watched the rest of Baki Hanma Season 2, let me know what you think. And as far as like the continuation of Baki goes, I believe next we get into what is called the Musashi arc, so that will be pretty exciting if we get that in anime form. So if you guys have seen the anime, let me know what you thought about the rest of Season 2. Let me know what you thought about the fight between Yujiro and Baki. And also, guys, if you like this review, go ahead and give it a thumbs up and a comment. Let me know what you thought. Help it out in the algorithm. And if you want to support the channel on a deeper level, I do have a Patreon, channel memberships, merch store, all that linked in the description. Other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day. I'll talk to you guys next time.